Hello you guys, welcome or welcome back to my channel. If it's your first time here, you're watching BookedonCharity, and in today's video we'll be talking about my September reads. In September I read 6 books, so let's talk about them. But before we get into that, I've got my baby of the day. So today I've got my Nespresso coffee and I'm having the gingerbread pod, and it's actually quite good. It's the first time that I'm trying it, so this is what I'm having. So as I'd like to do with my wrap-ups, I like to share some stats with you guys. I did already mention that I read 6 books this month, and that totaled to a page count of 2,368 pages. From the 6 books that I read, 3 of them were YA, 3 were fantasy, 2 were mystery, 1 was dystopia, and 1 of them had LGBTQIA plus representation. 1 was a thriller, 1 was a science fiction, 1 was romance, and 1 was a graphic novel. My average star rating for the month was 3.96 stars, which was not the best of months. I think I had a few books that were not so great, were just okay, and then I had like 1 which was fantastic. Let's get into this wrap up. So the first book that I finished in September was A Cruel Twist of Fate, and this is by H.F. Asquith. I will put a picture up here. This was a NetGalley book that I read, and it took me, I want to say, about 3 months being on and off with the book to read it. But in this book we follow a main character who lives with her mother above a sweet shop that they own, but the era in which the story is taking place is like somewhere in some century where there are no vehicles, people travel on horses, you know, you have the tax man come literally knock on your door to collect your tax. So it's that kind of setup. So she lives with her mother. Her father, we hear that he disappeared some years ago, and the mom is blaming this family who lives on this secluded island called Sapphire Isle. But she's grown up now with her mom. They own this sweet shop, but they're not doing so great financially. So comes a day where her mom actually gets threatened to be put in jail for not being able to pay her taxes or be up to date with her taxes. So our main character decides that she's going to look for a job, and with that she's been doing some preparations by going to reading classes in secret, because it's also an era where a lot of women don't really get the opportunity to like go to school, study, read. Your job is to essentially be a housemaker and just get married. So she goes to these secret classes to try to, you know, have a better life for herself. And by the time that her mom actually gets taken away and put in jail, she gets an opportunity to work as a governess for the family who lives on Sapphire Isle. And she does this in secret because obviously her mom really does not like that family, blames them for the disappearance of her father, but she, you know, chooses this as the lesser of the 2 evils and goes to work there. And even with her getting this job, she kind of lied on her resume, if I should call it that, about who she was. So instead of using her real name, she used her teacher's name and her credentials essentially to get this job. So she gets to this island and it's very secluded. It's like right on the edge of the ocean. So there are times during the day where the tide is high and no one can even cross into this island. But she makes it through with a friend who went to drop her off. And then she gets there, she starts, you know, she gets there a little bit early and she gets settled in. And from the first night that she's there, she's already having like weird dreams, and she's already hearing like voices through the walls. So you're getting a sense of like some haunted gothic element of this book, and you just don't know what's happening, and the main character doesn't know what's happening. But as she's spending time there, I think probably her second day of being in this house, somebody dies. So this kind of also turns into like a secluded murder mystery situation. And as the days keep going on, more people keep dying. So it's just one of those books where we are trapped on this island while there's a high tide with a murderer, because people keep dying and one of us in this house is essentially the murderer. But while you go through the story, you're also getting a sense of something is very weird with this family. So this family is well known for their inventions. They invent the most coolest, the most, innovative technologies. And you also find out that these things that they are building, making, they only work on Sapphire Isle. The minute they get off the island to go to the town, everything stops working. So there's also like a magical element to this island. But yeah, this is kind of like a little wrap up of what you can expect from the book. But I think that the writing style of the book, it was done well, but I feel like the pacing of the book was a little bit slow, and there's still parts of the story where I would have liked a bit more explanation on, especially with the magic that's running on this island. Like, where does it come from? Like, what makes the things that are built on this island work on the island and not work anywhere else? Like, I feel like that part was not really explained. The characters, I did not find any particular character really likable, but there is a child who our main character went to go be a governess for, and I don't know if it's the circumstances in which this child has been previously raised, but she's got this sinister thing where she's got an itch to just lock her teachers in the basement. Her first teacher, she locked in the basement for a couple of days, and by the time that woman came out of that basement, she had to be institutionalized. And she tried to do the same thing to our main character. So there's already like this dark, sinister thing that's happening with this child. And I feel like we also didn't get an explanation as to what makes her this, or why is she this way? Is it like a past trauma? Is it just that she's just a sinister little kid? We don't know. But yeah, plot-wise, I think that the idea of the story kept me moving forward. I kept wanting to know who is committing these murders. And I think the closer I got to the book, I could then start foreseeing and knowing who it is, and also picking up the reason as to why this person would be doing it. So that wasn't like a big reveal to me, but all in all, it was an okay book. It did take me quite a while to read, and I think it's just solely because I was reading it on my Kindle, and I'm still trying to figure out my reading pace when it comes to my Kindle. And also, I gave this book a 3.5-star rating because I did not mention that. The next book that I picked up in September is The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King, and this one is by Carissa Broadband. It is the second book in the Nightborn duet and a book in the series Crowns of Nyaxia. So this is the second book, and it's literally following right where we left off in book one. Book one, I really enjoyed. This book features vampires. I need to mention that. This is a vampire story, and our main character in book one is found as an orphan by this vampire king, who then ends up raising her. And she's human, being raised among vampires. So things are a little bit dangerous for her. And by he, I mean the vampire king, teaches her to defend herself and fight, and how to stand up for herself against the vampire, what to do, never let yourself bleed. So he's got all these mantras and things that he's been saying to her over the years to teach her on how to protect herself. So he's done her a great thing in that regard. And when she comes of age, she enters this deadly competition called the Kajari, which is mainly entered by vampires from different courts. And usually whoever wins the Kajari is going to be kind of like lining up to become the next king. That's essentially how their system works. She wants to enter it because she wants to have Nyaxia, the goddess, grant her a wish to essentially merge her with the vampire king so that she can be able to inherit his power and essentially his immortality. So she wants to win this, and you're just like, baby girl, how are you gonna win this when you are literally the only human here? So I feel like the way that the author wrote that whole competition gaming aspect, that was very, very interesting. And in book one, we'll also meet another character, Rain, who you get the sense that this is going to be a love interest, right? So this is a fantasy romance featuring vampires. So in book two, like I said, we continue straight on from where we left off in book one. I gave book one 5 stars. Book two, I gave 4 stars, because even though I enjoyed it, it wasn't giving me the same excitement as book one was. But what we found out in book two is that it revealed a lot of secrets and a lot of truths about our main character, because in book one you have all these questions as to why is this like this, why can she do this, you know, and you want to know a little bit more about the history of the vampire king as well as the history of Rain, because from book one we find that Rain is obviously a vampire, but why is he not like any other vampire? He was actually a nice person and assisting Oriah, which is our main character, during this competition. So you want to know a little bit more about him. So this book, I feel like we got a little bit more about the history of Rain, how he came about to be where he is now, and as well as a bit more about Rhea and her parents and how she came to be with the Vampire King. So the writing, still very easy, easily digestible. It is so good to listen to as well on audio. I love the vampire element of this book so much. I did enjoy the battle at the end, but I feel like it wasn't as intense as we got in book one, which is why I ended up on a 4-star rating for this book. But it's still a book that I really do enjoy, that I think people as well who like romantasy but also expect very little smut, especially in book one. I feel like there's a lot of pining and the romance is quite slow, so you're not going to get like a lot of smut or the romantic elements in here. It's a lot more of the fantasy, which I enjoy. So if you're somebody who enjoys the romance more than the fantasy, this one might not be the best pick, but I would still say pick it up, because I really enjoyed the vampire elements in the story. But yeah, I gave this one a 4-star. I'll definitely be reading more from Carissa Broadband, because so far I have been enjoying her work. Next up, I read A Novel Love Story by Ashley Poston, and I think I said this in one of my reading vlogs as well, that Ashley Poston is fast becoming one of my favorite authors to write romance. And maybe it's because her romance is also kind of like embedded in this magical realism slash supernatural. It has a supernatural aspect to it. So in this one we follow our main character, who is in the process of planning this getaway with her friends, who are also part of a smutty romance book club, and they decided to start doing these yearly trips where they go to the secluded cabin and bring all the smutty romance books and spend the weekend essentially just reading smutty books and discussing it as book clubs go. And already I was just like, this sounds like a great time. Okay, this sounds like a great time. I would love to do like something like this. But while in the planning, everybody that she's supposed to go to this trip with cancels on her. Everybody has one reason or another as to why they can't make it, as well as one of her best friends who ends up going on this romantic trip with her boyfriend, and she figures, you know what, this is a very important trip. They never get to go anywhere with each other, and so she's just like, you know what, it's fine, I understand. But at the same time, she is very sad that nobody can go on this trip with her. She also recently suffered a breakup with her fiance, so it's not just like a boyfriend for the last 6 months or whatever, but she was about to get married and she had a tragic breakup, and so she was really, really looking forward to this trip. And because of that, she decides to still continue and do this trip on her own. But on her way there, the sister gets lost. She gets lost and ends up in the small town, okay? And what she finds as she enters the small town is like, why does this town seem very familiar to me, okay? The people of this town and their names sound very familiar to me. And when she puts it together, she realizes that I might have ended up in a fictional town that only exists in my favorite romance series. And the people living in this town are essentially the characters of that series. And there's no explanation as to how this town came about, but I feel like I was just so excited about reading the book and just trying to figure out where this author is going to go with this book. And she meets one character that does not fit in the story, and she knows the story for like from front page to back page. She's read it multiple times, so she knows exactly what's going to happen, who's going to say what, the way that they're going to say it. And she meets this character that doesn't fit, that does not belong in the story, and she's trying to figure out who is this person. And the trope in this book is a grumpy sunshine trope, but I think that the author did it so well. I give this book a 4.5 star rating. I love Ashley Poston. I like the way that she writes her romance, and I think I rate her books mostly on how the romance builds, because she writes a lot of like chemistry in her romance books, and I really, really enjoy that. The characters never just like jump each other's bones from the get-go. I feel like we get some time for the characters to get to know each other. So it was really fun to read and listen to. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed this one. Next up, I reread Iron Gold by Pierce Brown. You guys, Pierce Brown is one of my favorites, always be one of my favorites. This book, I rated it 4.5 star rating. It is probably, this is the lowest book that I rated in the series. Is it? I feel like it is. And it's only because we start off the story about 10 years after the events of book 3. So it almost feels like we're starting a new series, but with the same characters, because we start to lay foundation on the things that are about to come in the next coming books. But even with that, there's just so many things that happen, and we still get quite a lot of action in here, but we get a lot of like moving pieces. Like it's almost like chess in here. You're setting up your pieces for the battle of a lifetime. This is what this book feels like, okay? The writing style in here, Pierce Brown writes the most accessible sci-fi I've ever read. Like, it is a sci-fi, but it doesn't feel very sci-fi-y, if that's a word, until you get to the spaceships and all that. But because we spend a lot of time on land, it doesn't really feel like you're in a sci-fi. However, this one, there is a character that we follow who is mainly on a spaceship for like, I think the most part of the book, until they land somewhere. But it's when you realize that you're actually on different planets that you realize I'm in a sci-fi story, but it reads more like a fantasy in my eyes, without anybody really having a magical system. And yeah, the writing style, very, very accessible. And I think I was telling a friend of mine the other day that, you know, it's one of those that you don't need to concentrate too much on the scientific elements of it. I feel like over time, as you keep reading the books, you start getting a sense of what all these different things do, but you don't need to dwell on them in order for you to understand what is happening in the story. So in this is the first book in which we follow multiple perspectives. I believe that we follow about 4 perspectives in this one. I did partner this with the audiobook. And the one thing that I was saying the other day is I love how each character, the way that Piers Brown writes them, the character that he gives them is even different in the way that he writes, like the language, if that makes sense. So for example, Darrow is a red, right? He comes from the mining colonies of Mars, and the way in which people from his tribe speak is very different to another tribe. Like the slangs that they use is very different. So the young Darrow from book 1 spoke a certain way, but the minute that he was transformed, his language and tone changed. And you also see it in this book because we have an older Darrow in this book, so you see that change. We've got another character who is also from Mars, so her language, her slangs are different. And we've got another character who grew up in kind of like riches, so their language is more posh, is more like high lingo, and the grammar that is used for that character, you can see that, oh my gosh, this person like went to school, studied all their lives and all that. And I like how he played on all of that, because as I was reading it, I was just like, he literally had to sit and be like, when I write this one character, I have to use these certain words, and when I write that character, I feel like I would have been confused and I would have forgotten. But he did such a great job with that. The plot in here, we have a lot of political intrigue in this one, a lot of political intrigue, because we come from a place where we've basically dismantled everything that we know about the society and how it runs, and we're trying to build it back. And you've got many people who have many opinions of how that should be done. So that rift and those politics are still very prevalent in the story, but at the same time, there's still this looming war that's just lurking in the background, because you think it's done, but it's not done. And it's just so good. There's a lot of characters that are brought in as well, new characters that you get to know and discover and understand a bit of their history. So this is why I say that this book feels more like laying foundation for what's to come. And I absolutely loved it. I love Piers Brown. I love Red Rising series. I will always keep saying it is one of my favorite series of all time, and you guys need to read it. The next book I read was A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. So I read a library copy, a physical library copy that I had to return, and I also partnered it with the audiobook. But I really enjoyed this one. I give it a 4.75 star rating. First of all, the writing style I think is one of my favorite things about the book, because it is told in multimedia on paper. So you've got the normal text, you've got emails, you've got SMSs, you've got phone calls, you've got all these things. But then when you partner it with the audiobook, you got the full experience, because when she's writing an email, you actually hear the keyboard being, you know, the typing sound. When she's on a phone call, you hear the phone call with whoever, and the voices are kind of like distorted to make it sound like you're on a phone call. So that whole listening experience, I feel like already gained a couple of stars for me. But I liked the mystery element. So this is a YA mystery thriller following a young girl who is doing this extra course at school, and she decides to investigate this murder of this young girl from her school. I think it was 5 years ago. And she wants to essentially disprove the fact that the boy who was accused of murdering this girl did not actually do it, because he doesn't believe that he could do such a thing. So she goes on this journey where she's trying to figure out what happened to this girl, and also why did we end up with this kid being the one accused of it. And she works along the accused boy's brother, and they go on. And I think that whole mystery element of it, I found it very interesting. I never expected the plot twist at the end. I never expected to find out who actually committed this whole thing. I did not see it coming, because the author wrote it in such a way that you get led astray, and whatever you think is going on, it's not. And I like that as I was reading, I was just as confused as our main character was when she's trying to like piece this whole mystery together. But it was such a great listening experience. I did really enjoy it. I generally do enjoy YA thrillers. I do have book 2 somewhere on my shelf that I want to probably pick up and figure out where we're gonna go with the story. I don't know what the second book is gonna entail or who it's gonna follow, and I think I'm kind of like worried because I enjoyed book 1 and I don't know if I'll enjoy book 2, because it felt like this case is closed and we don't need to continue with it. So I have no idea where Good Girl Bad Blood, I think that's the name of the second book, is gonna go. All right, and then lastly, I read a middle grade called Mooncakes. I gave this one 2.5 star rating, and halfway through I really considered DNFing it, but I thought to myself, it's a graphic novel, so just go with it. But yeah, the writing, okay, let me talk about the illustrations. The illustrations I really enjoyed. I think that they were done so beautifully, and this one features a sapphic, is it even a sapphic romance? So it's definitely a queer book, so this is where we get the LGBTQIA+ representation, because one of our characters is, I want to say, transgender, but they don't specifically say it, but they show it, that there has been a transition, right? So that's why I wanted to say that there's a sapphic, but let's just call it queer. There is queer representation in here, and we're following a character who is a witch, and she lives with her grandmothers. Definitely sapphic because the grandmothers are in a relationship, and that's a sapphic relationship on its own. The grandmothers are witches, and it seems like in this town people are aware that there's witches. I don't know. But there was no explanation on that either. And then this kid comes into town and you realize that they've been here before, and they're actually friends with our main character. This is where also the relationship comes in, and this friend is a wolf, and they are trying to figure out something about themselves, and there's this like evil lurking in this town that he's pulled to and he wants to get rid of. And I think he just wanted a change in pace and just to be away from his family and just find a place where he can settle and start afresh. So that's kind of like the backstory. But I think that I was a little bit bored with the book. I think I was a little bit bored. I didn't find anything really like exciting about it. So it's not one that I would like recommend. I would maybe, if I had to recommend, I would recommend it definitely to like maybe like a teenager, because there are some things that they do tackle like with identity, and I think this is maybe something that a teenager can enjoy reading, but I did not really enjoy it as much. But yeah, that is my reads for September. Let me know what you guys have recently read. If you made it this far in this video, leave me a feather or a fire emoji for iron gold. If you find a combination, if you actually find a fiery feather, even great. Even great. But leave me this emoji if you made it this far into this video. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.